Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Then, welcome everybody again. And this is the second lecture of our course, the Project Management Professional course. In the first lecture, we have introduced some basic concepts for you about project management. What is project? What is the definition of a project? What are the characteristics of a project? What is project management? And why do we launch projects? What's the reason behind launching projects? And we shed some light also on some basic concepts also about project management. And then we explained a little bit more about the Project Management Institute, which is, again, probably the most prestigious institute in the world advocating project management, and the PMP exam itself. And we explained also the difference or the transition that has taken place from the PMBOK Guide version 6 to the PMBOK Guide version 7. And we emphasize that the PMBOK Guide version 7 is kind of umbrella under which you have all the possible approaches of project management, including the version 6, including agile approaches, including hybrid approaches, including any other approach. It's used to again, as the PMI has indicated, it's used to manage all of the projects all of the time, because it's focused on a set of principles. It's focused on creating a mindset that you need to embrace as a project manager that guides your behavior while you manage the projects, right? And we wanted actually to start and get a little bit deeper about what are the components of the guide, what are the components that the PMBOK guides are explaining or are introducing. And again, these are some basic things that I think that every project manager should know about. You know, every professional project manager, or even a normal guy, normal project manager, should know what a project life cycle is, and should know what are the project phases and how can we use like phases and split our project into phases in order to make it more manageable. And what are the phase gates? What are the project management processes? What are the project management process groups? What are the knowledge areas? And we mentioned actually the knowledge areas last session, right? The 10 knowledge areas. So we will go a little bit more into details about these components. And let's start by the project life cycle. So basically, since we have agreed that projects are temporary in nature, that means that they start at some time at a definite beginning, as we mentioned, and they end at some time at a definite end. And while they live their lives, they go through phases, right? And this is what we call the project life cycle. So the project life cycle characterizes a project's lifespan. What are the, the phases that a project goes through right from the first day until we close the project at the last day. Now, first of all, there are some generic phases that any project will go through. Any project, regardless of the industry, again, regardless of the approach, regardless of anything, there are some generic phases, okay? Notice here, generic phases that any project will go through. And there are phases, other phases that are not generic, that are specific to that specific project. For instance, if you are like managing a project in software development, then you have the analysis phase. Now, this is a phase that is specific to that project because it's a software project. And probably there is another phase, which is the development phase. And there is another phase, which is the testing phase. Now, those phases are specific to that specific project, but we're not now here discussing the specific phases. We are here discussing now, or we want actually to discuss the generic phases, okay? The phases that any project will go through when we launch it, right, from day one until the last day of the project, okay? Let's have a look then at what are the generic phases of any project. Again, regardless that's a small project, whether it's a complicated project, whether it's a huge project, whether it's a software project, whether it's a construction project, all of the projects will have those generic phases. What are these generic phases? Now, the first generic phase of any project is the phase where we start the project, the phase where we launch the project, okay? So any project needs to be launched, right? This is the first phase. You have that, couple of days at the beginning of the project where you will have the formal authorization to start to launch your project, right? And usually in this phase, the project manager develops a very important document, which we call the project charter, right? I think most of you probably have heard of that, of this document, of this term, the project charter, which is a formal document that formally authorizes the existence of the project. Without this document, without the approval of this formal document, we don't have a project. We need to approve a formal document indicating what the project is, what the project objectives are, who the project manager is, who the project sponsor is, and so on. And by approving this document, we formally authorize the launch of the project, right? Okay, so this is the first generic phase. The second generic phase is the phase of organizing and preparing. Now, this is the phase where the project manager and the team work together in order to create a project management plan, right? A project management plan. Now, what is or how would a project management plan look like? Is it a schedule? Is it a cost? What do you think? How would it look like? What is a project management plan? How do you imagine a project management plan to be? To be more specific, do you think that the project management plan is one document or is one component? Excellent. Correct. Yes. So the project management plan is actually not one plan. It's actually the consolidation of subsidiary plans that I need and that should cover all the important aspects of the project, right? So you need to plan for the project schedule. You need to plan for the project cost and budget. You need to plan for the project communication. You need to plan for the project quality, for instance, right? So basically, when you create all of these subsidiary plans, the quality management plan, the resource management plan, the schedule management plan, the cost management plan, and every plan that you need, and you consolidate them, making sure that there is no contradictions, that there are no conflicts between those subsidiary plans, then you have created what we call the master or the project management plan, which basically, again, which is a consolidation of all the subsidiary plans that you need in your project, that you need to plan for in your projects, right? So this is the second generic phase. The second generic phase is organizing and preparing your project by creating a project management plan that consolidates the subsidiary plans that you will need in your project. Excellent. Now, what's the third generic phase? After you have created with your team a project management plan, you start what? Or the project goes through what? The project goes through execution, right? So it's the carrying out of work. And basically, in this generic phase, we start to deliver, right? Deliverables, like products are delivered here, services start to be delivered here, right? Results start, to be delivered here. So this is the third phase, the third generic phase again. And the last phase, the last generic phase is what? When you have created all the required deliverables and they are accepted by the stakeholders, then what's left is what? Is to close your project, right? To complete your project by making sure that you hand over everything and you archive all your project documents and you make sure of transition and so on, right? So it's the closing generic phase. Okay, does that make sense to you? Any questions so far? Okay, hopefully it's clear enough. So again, those are the generic phases that any project, regardless of its type, regardless of its size, regardless of its complexity, will go through. Any project will go through those 4 generic phases. But someone might ask, how do we know that we are launching the right project? How do we know that we should be investing in this project, not in another project? How are we going to be sure that this project has priority over other projects? The answer is that we will do this by doing a pre-project work phase. So this is a phase that we will do before even the project starts. And we call it the pre-project work. What's the objective of this phase again? Why do we need to do this phase again? Because we want to make sure that this is the right project to launch. This project is important. This project solves a problem for our company. This project brings about a change that we need a lot. Then we can launch this project. We have, like, you know, something that supports our decision to launch this project. Okay, what is this phase called? This phase is called the pre-project work, because we don't have project at this point. We're only doing a feasibility study. We're only conducting a needs assessment. We're only discussing a business case. What's the purpose of this project? Why we should be launching this project, not other projects? And we are also setting our benefits, because, you know, we mentioned earlier that any project, in order to be launched, it should bring about some benefits, right? It's the secret word of any project. You should look for benefits. Okay, so in this phase, basically, this is what we do. We conduct some kind of feasibility study, or a business case at least, which will explain why do we need to launch this project, not other projects, and what are the problems or what are the issues that the project is supposed to solve. Why do we need this project? And another important thing is, what are the benefits that this project should be bringing? So I should, like, clearly identify the benefits that the project should achieve, and when they will be achieved, and who will be responsible for achieving them, and how we will measure them. And we call this document, this important document, we call it the benefits management plan. Okay, so basically we might end up here with 3 documents in this pre-project work phase. We might end up with 3 documents: a document that we call a needs assessment document. So this is a document that explains the need of the project. A business case document, which explains and proves the feasibility of the project. It's kind of, you know, a feasibility study of the project. And the benefits management plan document, which indicates the benefits that the project should bring about and how to measure them and when they're supposed to be achieved and so on. Okay, we call these documents, we call them business documents, to distinguish them from project documents, because these documents exist before the project, right? Before even the project is launched. They are not project documents. They are not project plans. They are business documents. Okay, are you following with me? No, it depends actually. It depends on the project that you're discussing. Sometimes it's enough to, you know, to develop a business case and that's it. Sometimes it's enough to develop a needs assessment and business case. So basically it depends actually on what the top management wants, what the top management is trying to prove. So this request comes right from the top management, whether we are requested to develop a business case or a benefits management plan or a needs assessment, that comes from the top management. And the other thing is, again, who conducts those documents or who develops those documents, do you think? The project manager or someone else? Who's responsible for developing the needs assessment and the business case or the benefits management plan? Excellent, yeah. Again, we don't have here at this point in this pre-project phase, we don't have here a project manager, right? Because the project has not started yet. We don't have someone with the title project manager. We don't have a project team, right? We don't have anything about project. Here, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of, we're just exploring the possibilities of having this project or not having this project. Now, who does or who develops those documents and who develops the feasibility study and who develops the needs assessment and who develops the benefits management plan is probably, yes, someone that we call the business analyst. It might be a person or it might be a group of people. It might be, again, a consulting company that we hire in order for them to come and develop for us a feasibility study, right? And it might be a separate project by its own. The feasibility, creating a feasibility study might be a separate project by its own, or might be considered the phase one of this project, okay? So the people that are working here are business people, are business analysts, who know how to identify the business issues and how to study the feasibility of the project, okay? So based on the outcomes of their study, we will have a recommendation whether to proceed with the project or not to proceed with the project. So if we had that recommendation of proceeding with the project, then we will go then to the first generic phase of the project, which is starting the project. And we develop the project charter that comes from, now notice this slide, right? Where do I get the information that I need to develop the project charter as a project manager? Now the project manager develops the project charter, but where does he get the information that he needs to develop the project charter? He gets those information from the business documents, right? From the needs assessment, from the business case, from the benefits management plan. So he takes a summary of all of the, you know, the work that has been done in the pre-project work, and he formulates the project charter and submits the project charter for approval by the top management. And if the top management approves the project charter, then we go ahead and move on to the next generic phase, which is organizing and preparing the project, okay? Does that make sense to you? Any questions so far? Excellent. Again, those are the generic phases, okay? Now there are some projects with specific phases, as I mentioned earlier, right? You have a software project, and the software project usually goes through the analysis phase, through the development phase, through the testing phase, through the rolling out phase, okay? Now those are specific phases for that specific project. And why do you think we would do this? Why do you think we would use specific phases or break a project into specific phases? Why would we do that? Why not handle the project as one, you know, big phase and that's it? Why do we need sometimes to break the project into phases? Yes, in order to make it more manageable. That's correct. Okay. That's correct. So in order to make it more manageable, because there's a golden rule that you can note down right now, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, there are some golden rules that I recommend that you all the time try to follow up with me and note them down for me. The golden rule states that the larger the project is, the more likely it will fail. The larger the project is, the more likely it will fail. The probability of failure will increase for large projects. Is that correct or no? Do you agree on that or no? If you have a very small project, then it's very easy to manage, right? But if you have a huge project, if you have a mega project, then it's going to be very much difficult to manage, and the probability, the odds of failure will increase. Is that correct or no? So what do you do in that case? What do you do when you have like a very huge project and you don't want the probability of failure to increase? You try to, you know, overcome this probability of failure. You basically break down the huge project into smaller phases, right? In order to be able to manage them more easily. Is that correct? Yeah, that's the reason why we tend to have those specific phases, okay? And we'll explain more on that later on. But for now, those are the 4 generic phases, and there is a phase that we conduct before even the project launches, which is the pre-project work. Now, if you have noticed, there's a phase gate, there's a checkpoint that separates each phase from the other. You noticed that, right? Why do you think we need to set or to allocate a phase gate between every 2 phases of the project? Why would we need that? What's the reason behind that? Might be, yes, to get the approval before proceeding to the next phase. What other reasons that you can think of? Why do you set checkpoints in a highway, for instance? Why would the police set checkpoints? Excellent. No, those are not milestones because they are not linked to specific achievements. No, they are just like a separation between every phase and the next. Yeah, so the correct answer is actually this checkpoint. The purpose of this checkpoint or the phase gate, or even we call it the kill point. We call it the kill point. One of the names is kill point, is to make sure that we will not proceed to the next phase until we are very sure that the project is going in the right direction, that the project is going to deliver what is supposed to deliver, that the project will bring about the benefits that we planned for. So it's a checkpoint where we want to stop and ask ourselves, is the project going in the right direction? Is the project delivering what it is supposed to be delivering? Okay, if the answer is yes, then go ahead, you can move on to the next phase. But if the answer is no, then what we do, we kill the project. And that's why we call those also those phase gates, we call them kill points, because projects can be killed here. If the project cannot prove that it's still necessary, that it's still going in the right direction, that it's still going to bring the benefits that we actually documented in the benefits management plan, then better we kill the project. Otherwise, it's gonna turn out to be a black hole, consuming our resources, right? Consuming our time, consuming a lot of dollars without achieving anything. And that happens, by the way. I think some of you have seen this. Huge projects that went out of control and and turned out to be like black holes, consuming a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources without achieving nothing. Okay, do you agree? So that's why we need to set those phase gates in order, to check that the project is still going in the right direction. Now, regardless of the type of phases, whether they are generic phases or specific phases, as I mentioned earlier, like a phase of analysis and a phase of development, you still need to set those phase gates. You still need to set those, checkpoints in order to make sure that, again, the project is going in the right direction. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Excellent. I think it's time to take a 15-minute break, right, for the Maghrib. So 15 minutes, inshallah, and we will continue after that. So it's some kind of, it's not like a checklist. No, there would be some criteria for sure. The committee that's responsible for the checkpoint will have some kind of criteria that if the project is still fulfilling, then the project can continue on to the next phase. If it's not, then they will stop the project. So it's not like a checklist, it's kind of criteria, that we need to examine before allowing the project to go to the next phase. Okay, that makes sense? Okay, excellent. So 15 minutes and we'll get back to you, inshallah. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So let's discuss more about the project life cycle and how is it related to the product life cycle, because for each product as well, we have a life cycle. So how do the project life cycle and the product life cycle interact? What's the relationship between product and project life cycles? And what are the general characteristics of the project life cycle? And what are the life cycle development approaches? And how do I select the right development approach for my project life cycle? Okay, ready to go? Okay, so let's start first by comparing and explaining the relationship between the product life cycle and the project life cycle. Now, each product that you can think of has also a life cycle because it started at some point, the product, and it will end. We will stop producing that product at some point, right? So for instance, if you think of the mobile phones, of the product, which is the mobile phone started at some point when people found a way to create, the device that you can hold in your hand and give you the ability to communicate with other people, right? Started with a concept and then a prototype probably, and then it went into commercial, designing and production, and then it's continue actually producing until the moment. But at some point in the future, we know that this product will be replaced by other probably better or more relevant products, like for instance, I don't know, maybe the the glasses, the new glasses that they're talking about, because they can give you all the capabilities of a mobile phone while you are wearing the glasses. You can call everyone and you can take pictures and videos and give lectures. I don't have to have the laptop to give you lectures. I just put on my glasses and I can explain to you everything and you can see everything, and we can take we can make some virtual reality space, and we can meet virtually, and it's just like we're thinking just out loudly. So basically there's some point where each product will also stop to exist. Okay, and to have a better understanding, those are the 4 phases of any product life cycle. So this is now the product life cycle. Okay, so again, any product that you can think of is first introduced. So this is the phase of introduction. We introduce the product, we introduce for you a concept of a mobile phone or a concept of Google glasses or whatever the new product is. and we create a prototype, and then we think that this is a good product and the people will like and the people will buy. Then we move on, or the product moves on to the growth phase. So there will be a demand to buy the product, and we start to, manufacture more of the product, and we start to enhance the product by offering more features. Now every new version of the iPhone, for instance, or of the Samsung Galaxy has new features or new functions. So this is what we call the growth phase, because the product now is evolving, and the usage is evolving, the sales is evolving, the impact is evolving, and so on. This is the growth. Now we are living the growth phase of the for instance, of the mobile phones, although it's actually not the growth. Okay, now after a while, and when we're like, we have developed every feature that we can think of and every function that we can think of the mobile phones, we reach the third phase, which is the maturity phase. Now in this phase, we are actually kind of out of new features or out of new functions. I think now in the mobile phone business, we reached this phase, right? You feel now that there is no big difference between iPhone 13 and iPhone 14, for instance, or Galaxy S21 and Galaxy S22, for instance, right? There is no huge difference between those versions, because they have reached the maturity level. There is not a lot to add, right, on the previous features. And the sales, so basically the sales is stabilized, the usage is stabilized, the production amounts is stabilized, everything stabilizes at this phase, right? And after that phase, some new products will be introduced again, for instance, like, I don't know, Google Glasses. So this will make the demand on this product less, and the product starts to decline. So this is the decline or the retirement phase, where the sales will plunge down, where the usage will be less, where the people will ask for less of this product. So we will find ourselves at the end of the day discussing whether we should actually close this product and get rid of this product and start producing other products, right? So this is these are the four phases of the product life cycle: the introduction phase, the growth phase, the maturity phase, and the decline phase. Okay. Now, how is this related to the project life cycle? Okay. For instance, in the introduction phase, we said, I explained to you that in the introduction phase, we create a concept of the product, right? And then we maybe create a prototype of the product, and maybe then another prototype of the product. Now, each of these can be considered a project, correct or not? When you create a concept, can we consider this a project? When you create a prototype, when you create a new prototype, right? Yeah, so each of these endeavors can be looked at and can be managed as projects, correct or no? Take the growth phase, when we introduce the new features. So introducing new features to the product, isn't it considered a project? Yes, it's considered a project. When we, for instance, launch a marketing campaign for the product, isn't it considered as a project? Yes, it can be considered as a project, and so on. So basically, in each phase of the product life cycle, we might be launching and managing several projects, right? So for instance, in one product life cycle, we have launched and managed 7 projects. That makes sense to you, right? So basically, which contains which is, the umbrella of which, the product life cycle or the project life cycle. Basically, the product life cycle contains one or more project life cycles, right? or if you can see it the other way around, one or more of the project life cycles is contained within one or more of the product life cycle. Is that correct? Does that make sense to you? Okay. Now, later on, you will get to know that these projects, when they have similar characteristics, can be grouped under one program. So a program is a group of related projects, and we tend to group those similar projects under one program in order to make it easier for us to manage those projects. Okay, so at the end of the day, the product life cycle again will have probably more than one project life cycle and more than one program life cycle as well. And all of this is governed by a portfolio, what we call a portfolio governance. So basically, this is the governance of how we invest our money. This is what tells us whether we should invest in this product or in this product, okay? What is the better investment for our company? In which product should we be investing our money, okay? No, not Samsung 2, but creating a concept for Samsung S22 is a project. Enhancing the features of Samsung S22 is a project, okay? Killing the Samsung S22 is a project, okay? Marketing the Samsung S22 in Riyadh city is a project. You notice? Okay, so Samsung S22 is one of the products, and we can develop this product, we can kill this product, we can enhance this product, we can, you know, help this product mature by doing projects and by doing programs. Okay, does that make sense? So this is the relationship between the product life cycle and the project life cycle. Now, let's move on again and explain a little bit more about the phases that we have mentioned. We mentioned earlier that if your project is small enough and is clear enough, then there is probably no need to break it down into phases. Is that correct? Because the golden rule that I told you about states that the larger the project is, the more likely it will fail. So basically, if the project is simple, is small in size, is pretty much clear, then you don't have to break it into specific phases. Is that correct? So in this scenario, in this situation, you can handle the project as a single phase, right? We call this a single phase project. Now, again, a single phase project will have, at the end of the day, we'll have the 4 generic phases that we explained earlier, right? We'll have the initiating or starting phase, we'll have the organizing or planning phase, we'll have the executing phase, and we'll have the closing phase. But all of that is contained in one single phase because the project, again, is simple and clear and small in size, right? Okay. What about a more complicated project? What about a project, for instance, to build a new factory? We want to build a new factory, and this new factory will have lots of buildings, there will be restaurants, there will be warehouses, there will be production lines, and so on and so forth. This is a huge project, right? If you handle it as a single phase, you will increase the probability of failure for this project, right? So better we break down this project as we agreed on, right? So here the project manager, for instance, decided to break down this project into 2 phases, specific phases, which are the design phase and the construction phase. So we will have 2 phases. The first phase, we will develop designs for all the buildings and, you know, warehouses and everything that we need in the factory. And the other phase is the construction phase, where we will take the designs and construct accordingly. Okay, does that make sense to break down the project into those two phases? Makes sense, right? Now, are these phases separate, completely independent and separate, or can they overlap? What do you think? Can those two phases overlap? For instance, you're working on some design and you're constructing a design that has been approved already. They can overlap, right? There's the possibility of, you're working on some designs and you have some designs approved that you can start constructing immediately, right? So to gain some time. Yeah, so this is an example of two overlapping phases. This is an example of a project, of a multi-phased project. We call this a multi-phased project, okay? That consists of two phases, and those phases are overlapping. Okay, does that make sense? Excellent. Another little bit more complicated example. We have a project where we want to clean up a hazardous waste site. Okay, for instance, like we had, a chemicals factory, and we decided to close the chemicals factory, and we want actually to clean up the site and do a landscaping in order to use the site for other new factory. So this sounds a little bit more complicated, right? Because here you're dealing with something that is risky. You're dealing with a hazardous waste site. So the project manager here suggested the following breakdown, suggested to break down the project into 3 phases. The first phase is facility decommissioning. So basically we make sure that the factory is completely closed. We move out all the equipment. We move out all the production lines. We release all the labor, the resources, and so on. We make sure that everything is closed and the facility is decommissioned. Okay. The second phase is to remove the waste, the hazardous waste. So we bring specialized people with specialized equipment, and they remove all the waste. And the third phase is the landscaping. So basically we do a landscaping of the site in order to use it in other projects. Okay, so again, we have now this multi-phased project. Multi-phased project, 3 phases, right? Can these phases overlap? Can these phases overlap? Do you think that we can, for instance, start removing waste while the facility is not fully decommissioned? Can we, for instance, start landscaping while there is some waste still in the site? We cannot, right? Yeah, so this is what we call sequential phases. So you cannot proceed to the next phase until you completely close out the previous phase. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now someone was asking, can we handle each of this phase as a separate project? You can, but it doesn't make sense, because at the end of the day, this is one project. Those are not different projects. All of these are happening under the same project, the same title. So it doesn't make sense to, separate them and make them separate projects. No, those are separate phases, not separate projects. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. Now you have noticed as well that when we decide to break down the project into phases, again, each phase will go through the 4 generic phases that we explained, right? So here in the design phase, you will still have the initiating phase, the planning phase, the executing phase, and the closing phase. And then the construction phase, you still have the initiating, the planning, the executing, and the closing phase, and so on. So for instance, here, you have 3 times initiating, you have 3 times planning, you have 3 times executing, you have 3 times closing. You notice that, right? And probably you will have here 3 charters, for instance, and 3 plans for each phase, right? And you will have checkpoints. Where will you set your checkpoints? Between every 2 phases, you will have a checkpoint or a phase gate or a kill point, as we mentioned, right? In order to make sure that we are proceeding as we should be proceeding, right? Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, any question? Excellent. If you don't have any question, then let's move on and discuss some general characteristics about the project lifecycle. And again, this is important for you to understand as a project manager. Now, all of the things that we are discussing until the moment are not, like we're not going deep into the project itself. We're just looking at the project from the outside. We're just looking at the big picture and how we handle projects and the life cycle and the relationship between the project and the product and so on. But this is very important for you, to know the context, to understand the context, okay? Now let's discuss some general characteristics about the project life cycle. For instance, what do you think about the cost of changes if we want to implement some changes? Now, implementing a change will mean a cost one way or another, right? If you want to change something in your project, then this will imply some cost, because some work needs to be redone, right? You need to do some rework, you need to replace some design, you need to, I don't know, okay? Now, when is the cost of change low and when is the cost of a change high? At the beginning of the project or at the end of the project? What do you think? When are the, or when is the cost of a changes lower, at the beginning or at the end of the project? Yeah, the logic states that when we are at the end, at the beginning of the project, then the change that has been requested can be done without a lot of extra charges, right? Or extra cost, because you just basically replace some design. So it's just a paperwork, right? But imagine if we are at the end of the project when we build the whole product or build the whole tower, and then the customer comes to you and told you that he decided to change the design of the apartments. Now that would cost a lot. Correct or not? Okay, so what should I be doing as a project manager? What is the benefit of knowing this for me as a project manager? As a project manager, I should be trying all the time to control the changes so that they take place on early stages of the project, right? You want to avoid making changes at later stages of the project, right? And how do you make that? How do you control the changes as much as possible and try to avoid making changes in later stages of the project? What is your strategy here? The strategy here is very simple. The changes come from stakeholders, right? From the client, basically, from other stakeholders as well. Those are the people who request changes usually, right? And why would they change? Sorry, why would they request changes? Because probably we did not listen to them correctly in the first place. Probably we did not gather their requirements correctly from the first place, right? Or not? This is basically the most important reason for having change requests. You have a lot of change requests when you don't identify your project stakeholders correctly, and when you don't listen to their requirements, and when you don't gather their requirements correctly. Okay, so in order to avoid this costly problem, you need to make sure to identify your project stakeholders as soon as possible. and you need to make sure to gather their requirements as soon as possible. Otherwise, you will end up receiving a lot of change requests down the road. Okay, does that make sense to you? You might get a question on that on the PMP exam. Why are you getting a lot of change requests? Okay, you might get this question on the PMP exam. Okay, so this is a general characteristic. Again, it applies to any project, regardless of your project, regardless of what your project is. This is a general rule, okay? Another general rule is about risks. When do you think risks are more, or you have a higher level of risks? At the beginning of the project or at the end of the project? Where do we have a higher level of risks? At the beginning of the project or at the end of the project? Yeah, you can, everyone can look at the chart and tell me, right? It's very easy when you look at it. Okay, why? The question is why? Why in the beginning of the project we have a higher level of risk? Excellent, yes, Maz, because in the beginning of the project, there are so many uncertainties, right? There are so many things that we are not sure about. There are so many questions that we still don't have the answer of how the project looks like, how the product looks like, what is the scope of the work that we need to do, what are the equipments that we should be using, what are the resources that we need to acquire, and so on, right? So when you have that high level of uncertainty, you have as well that high level of risks, because uncertainty means risk, basically. Okay. So at the beginning of the project, you have this high level of uncertainty, and that's why you have that high level of risks. And as you move on, as you proceed in the project life cycle, the uncertainty level will decrease. And so is the risk levels, because things become clearer, because things, now you understand more about your project, now you understand more about the scope, now you understand more about the resources, and so on, right? Makes sense, right? Okay, any questions so far? Excellent. So those are some general characteristics that you need to keep in mind when you manage your project and when you manage your project life cycle. Last but not least, let's discuss the project development life cycle approaches. How would you approach your project life cycle? Because you can approach actually the project life cycle in different ways. Now, the traditional way that project managers have been using for probably hundreds and thousands of years is what we call the predictive way, or the plan-driven way, where basically you have a clear scope, you know exactly what needs to be done, and you develop your plan accordingly. So you have a plan for a clear scope of what you need to do. You have then a clear schedule, you have then a clear cost baseline and budget, you have a clear, for instance, resource management plan, and so on. And you approve the plan and you proceed to execution. You might need to do some slight changes, so you do them and you proceed. Okay, this is the traditional way of approaching the life cycle. Let me use this to explain more. So basically, if this is the time, okay, so then you approach your life cycle based on phases, as we mentioned earlier. So you have like phase 1, And phase 1 ends with some deliverables, and then you have phase 2, and phase 2 ends with some deliverables as well, and phase 3, and so on, right? Okay. This is one way of approaching the life cycle, the project life cycle. But in certain projects, especially nowadays with the technology advancement, you have lots of uncertainty. For instance, you want to develop a vaccine for COVID-19. How do you do this? What are the phases that you need to go through? What is the work that needs to be done? Here, you cannot actually have a full plan. You cannot predict what's going to happen in the project, right? Because this is something that we don't know how to develop yet. It's a matter of try and error. We'll try this, and if this works, then it's okay. If it doesn't work, we'll try another way of developing the vaccine. And then we'll try another technology, and then we'll try another, I don't know, mix of medications and so on, right? So it depends on doing the work again and again and again and again and redoing until we reach the correct solution. This approach is what we call the iterative approach. Okay, so the iterative approach will tackle the project life cycle on iterations, you know. So basically, use this. We will do the first round of try and error. If we achieve a solution, then okay. If we don't achieve, then we will do another round, and then another round, and then another round, until we find that vaccine, right? So this is what we call the iterative development approach of the project life cycle. Does it make sense to you? You understand? So we will not have a complete product. We will not have a finished product until what? Until the last iteration, right? No, because here we will not again achieve any functioning product. You will get the product at the end of the life cycle. And so is the situation here as well when you use predictive or plan-driven life cycle. In the plan-driven life cycle as well, when do you receive your product, your functioning product? Again, at the end, at the end of the last phase. You did 1, 3, 4 phases, you get the final product at the final phase. Now, sometimes this is not the case that you want. Sometimes you want actually to speed up the process and want to have a functioning product early in your project. You don't have the patience to wait until the end of the project. You need to see something working. You need to see a functioning product early on in the project. Then what do? Then we have another development approach that we call the incremental approach. Okay. And in the incremental approach, take this. So this is again project life cycle. In the incremental approach, we will build the product by increments. Okay. So for instance, first we will, let's say that we want to create the final product is a car. Okay. So I want to create a functioning car as early as possible. Now, to create a functioning car as early as possible, do you need, for instance, to create a media system for the car? Is that necessary in the first increment, for instance? To have, like, you know, a media screen? Is it necessary, for instance, to have like security or safety systems like the EBS and EBD? No, you start by what? You start by the very important functions that every car should have, right? So every car, in order to qualify as a car, in order to function as a car, what do you need for a functioning car? You need, for instance, the chassis, right? The engine, and the transmission, and the steering, right? Because at the end of the time, at the end of the day, you need to steer, right? So that's it. So we will take the product, and we will build the product on increments. So the first increment, for instance, is what you have mentioned, which is the chassis, engine, gearbox, and steering. Now the customer here is very happy, right? Because from the first increment, we delivered something that is working, that the customer can test and see it's working. It's a car that you can drive. It doesn't have chairs, unfortunately. You need to sit like on, you know, I don't know what, you should to put some manual chair and sit on. It doesn't have safety systems. It doesn't have probably some roof on it, but it works, right? It works as a car. And then in the second increment, you start adding now the second priority items for the customer, right? So basically you might add now the furniture for the car, or the roof for the car. So this is the second increment. The third increment, you would then build the safety systems. The fourth increment, okay, so we are building the product by introducing new features and new functions in every increment. So the life cycle consists of increments, and the customer is receiving increments in every increment. The customer is receiving some new features and functions. Okay, is that clear to you now, how it's different from the iterative life cycle? No, because the product life cycle, if you went back again, the product life cycle is about introducing a product, growing the product. Now, growing the product can go through this iterative, but then the maturity, you don't have these increments, or the decline, you don't have these increments, okay? But as we mentioned, in the product life cycle, you have project life cycle. So you have this maybe incremental project life cycle within the product life cycle. Okay, does it make sense? Okay, now I'm sure that again you need to review the lecture, you need to re-listen to the lecture, and when you re-listen, you will understand more, a lot more about the things that we are explaining here. Okay, so again, so we have the traditional or predictive or plan-driven life cycle. We have the iterative, which is try and do again, and try and do again, and try and do again until you reach the final product. And you have the incremental, which basically the customer here is receiving a product in every increment. Now, this is the beauty of it. The customer will not need to wait until the finish of the project. The customer will receive a working product in each increment, okay? And then someone said, okay, why we don't mix the iterative and incremental? Why we don't actually sum up the benefits of iterative and incremental? So we basically develop our products on increments using iterations, which are specific amount of times. So for every 2 weeks, we will deliver an increment. And so we have iterations of 2 weeks. And in every iteration of 2 weeks, we will have an increment. And this is basically what we call what? The agile approach. So basically, the agile approach is what? Is basically iterative approach and incremental at the same time. Iterative, it means we will go through iterations. Iterations are fixed periods of time, for instance, 2 weeks or 1 month. And in every iteration, we will deliver some increment to the customer. Okay, and this is what Agile is. Agile is about delivering incremental or new layers of features and functions in every iteration. Or we call it sprint as well, as we will see later on. We call it iteration or we call it sprint. It's the same meaning. Okay. So basically we'll have in the agile life cycle, you will have again the increments, but what? Again, on iterations, right? Like that. Now the last development approach, which is the hybrid, combines different approaches, because in some projects, you might find yourself in need to use more than one approach. For instance, in a project, you might have to set up some hardware and to develop also a software that you can use with the hardware. So setting up a hardware is a pretty much clear scope for you to do. So you might decide to do it with predictive plan or plan-driven approach. Setting up a hardware, you know, buying servers, setting up the servers, configuring the server. This is very clear scope of work that you can do, that you can plan for. So you do it with a predictive approach. But developing a software that you can use with these servers is something that needs, for instance, an agile approach. So what you want to do here is to mix or to use predictive approach for the hardware and agile approach for the software. So you end up doing what? You end up then creating a hybrid, which is a combination of predictive and agile. Okay, does that make sense to you? Any question? Ladies, gentlemen, hope that everything is clear. This matrix summarizes all of the things that we have mentioned. So basically, Muaz, hybrid is the combination of 2 approaches. It might be predictive plus agile, it might be predictive plus iterative, it might be predictive plus incremental. Okay, because your project have different phases. In some phases, you might want to use the predictive approach. In other phases, you might want to use agile. Okay, so you create this hybrid. Okay, so again, these are the methodologies or the development approaches, depending on the complexity again. So, for instance, agile, you have complex environment where we need to develop a product quickly and feedback is very valuable. Changes should be relatively easy, like the software projects. We recommend agile for usually software projects. While construction project, for instance, we recommend predictive, because in the construction projects, changes are minimum, changes are expensive. You don't want to do them unless you are very sure you want to do them. Predictability is important. We have the designs, we have clear scope of work. Okay, so you use predictive. In the iterative, we have dynamic requirements and we need to redo the work until we reach the final correct product. So we depend on learning. That's why we use iterative. Incremental, we build the product increment by increment using small increments. Hybrid is when we use combination of these approaches. Okay. Now, again, this is a summary that you can go through. So the predictive or plan driven again, or the traditional, or the waterfall, they call it the waterfall, right? Because it has even, you know, the shape of waterfall, because you start by, you know, a clear plan, because you have a clear scope and you have clear phases, and each phase has clear deliverables, as I mentioned. And once you finish, you don't go back. Once you finish the analysis, you don't go back from design to analysis. Okay, so you're going like in a waterfall until you reach your final product and your final destination. And here, the most important thing about managing the project is managing the cost in the predictive or the plan-driven approach. While, for instance, in the iterative, the goal is to reach the correct solution. So you do it one time, another time, third time, until you redo until you reach the correct product, as we mentioned. In the incremental life cycle, we build the product by increments. So first, again, the engine, the transmission, the steering, and the wheels. This is the first increment. And then we do the second increment. So again, we do the same thing, but for different components. Now we add the safety components, we add the multimedia system, we add whatever, and then we continue like this increment. In each time we deliver an increment to the product, and the goal is the speed, because in every increment we are delivering something that is working to the customer, as I mentioned. The agile, which is iterative and incremental. Here, the most important thing or the goal is the customer value. So we deliver increments on or based on iterations, based on specific periods that we follow. And last but not least, the hybrid, again, which is combination of two or more approaches. So I do some combination of those approaches, what fits my product or my project need. Construction, as I mentioned, construction means your scope is clear. So you use predictive or plan-driven. Yeah, incremental or cumulative, correct. Okay, so if you have a clear scope, then it's a plan-driven or it's a waterfall. If you don't have a clear scope and you don't know how to do it, then iterative. If you don't have clear scope, but you know how to do it and you need to do it quickly, then incremental. If you don't have clear scope and you need to do it quickly and you need to do it with a customer feedback, then agile. If you have different phases in the project with different clarity and scope, then you use hybrid. Okay, does that make sense? Excellent. Let's take another 15 minutes break and continue after that. Okay, thank you. Welcome back again, everyone, and let's continue with this session after we have explained the different approaches of the project lifecycle development and when and why would we use each of these different approaches. It's very important, you know, and it's considered actually one of the tailoring decisions. Tailoring is a very important thing that we'll be discussing in a while. You as a project manager, along with your team, of course, you need to tailor the management approach that you will use in your project. You should tailor it to your project need, to your project size, to your project complexity. And one of the tailoring decisions is to decide on what's the best development approach, what's the best project lifecycle development approach that you should be using in your project. Okay, so let's move on now to a new chapter. We will be where we will discuss the business and strategy context of project management and how project management can be used as a tool to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. So we will get to know the organizational project management, the OPM. What's the OPM and what's the benefit of the OPM? We will get to know what is tailoring, what are the business documents, although we explained them a couple of minutes ago, but we will expand a little bit on that. What are the business documents? And how does the environment influences the project? And what are the common organizational structures that you might find yourself working in as a project manager? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of each organizational structure? And we will also get to know more about the project management office, the PMO, and why it is needed and the different roles that the PMO can play. Okay, so let's start. Just to remind you, 8% of the PMP exam questions will focus on the business and strategy context, or on the things that we will discuss here. Okay, so you have like 8% of the questions tackling the business context and the strategy context. Okay, so let's start by explaining the OPM, the organizational project management. I think we explained earlier, right, the difference between projects and operations. Projects are unique endeavors. They take place only one time. They are temporary in nature, while operations are repetitive. They are not limited by definite time. We tend to repeat them all the time, and they produce the same deliverables. They are not unique. Okay, so I think we know this by now, right? Now let's discuss what is a program and what is a portfolio. Now I think we mentioned that earlier as well. What is a program again? Who can remind us? We defined a program as what? I just defined it like, you know, a couple of slides ago. A program is a group of projects, yes, that have similar characteristics, that we manage them in order to get some benefits of managing them. Those benefits are not to be producible if we don't manage those projects in one program. So again, the program consists of projects that have similar characteristics. So projects with similar characteristics, for instance, in our organization, we have several projects in order to enhance our marketing efforts. Okay, so it would be a good thought to group all of these projects, since all of these projects are being managed to enhance our marketing efforts. So we put them in one program and we call this program the marketing program, right? So we can have a marketing program, for instance, we have a quality program, we can have like a human resources program, for instance. So that would be the projects that share the similar characteristics of enhancing marketing efforts, or enhancing quality of our products, or enhancing the capabilities of our human resources, and so on. Okay. Okay. What is a portfolio? Now, when you hear the term portfolio, the first thing that comes into your mind is what? The portfolio, the word portfolio. The first thing that comes to your mind is the dollars, right? The investment. When we talk about investment, we all the time talk about portfolios. So where do you want to invest your money? Okay. And it's the same case here. Now, the question here is, as a company, as a business, where do you want, or in which projects and in which programs do you want to invest your money in order to achieve your strategic objectives? Okay, because if you want to achieve your strategic objectives, you need to invest some money in some projects or in some programs that will help you achieve your strategic objectives, right? Let's take an example to make sure you grab this conception. So basically, I think most of you know a little bit about strategic planning, right? Every business should have some kind of strategic plan where we understand that, for instance, now we are in 2022 and our market share, for instance, we have, let's assume that we are a manufacturing company, okay? So our market share now in 2022 is 10%, for instance. So 10% of the products that are being sold in the market are manufactured by us. And then we set some objectives, strategic objectives, we call them, for a 3 to 5 years time period. So for instance, in 2027, I want to achieve an objective of increasing my market share from 10% to 20%, for instance. Okay, so now this is the strategic objective that I have. I want to increase my market share from 10% to 20%. Now the question is, how do you want to do that? How do you want to increase your market share from 10% to 20%? What do you think? Do you have any suggestion on how we can do that? How we can close the gap between now and the future? Between 10% and 20%. What do you suggest? If you are the manager of the company and the shareholders ask you to, or set a goal for you to increase the market share by 10%, what do you need to do? Now, some of you would think of, okay, let's add some new products, right? Let's start producing some new product. Product 1, product 2, maybe product 3. Products and services. Now, yes. Now, some of you might also suggest that we enhance the quality of our products. So we do like 1 or 2 projects in order to enhance the quality of our products and of our services. Now, some of you might suggest that we need also to do some marketing projects, marketing campaigns, marketing analysis, and so on, right? Some of you might also want to suggest that we should also recruit more people. So this is a project of recruitment and enhance their capability, for instance, and I don't know, make sure of meeting some regulatory requirements concerning the Sawadization, for instance, and so on. So we have projects that concern the human resources. So what you did basically is you determined the projects that, if launched and managed correctly, will make you achieve your strategic objective, right? Now, all of these projects need investment, correct or not? If you want to enhance the quality of some product, if you want to add a new product, if you want to enhance the capability of your people, if you want to launch a new marketing campaign, all of these projects that I mentioned are internal projects that require investment, correct or not? So basically now we are talking about what? All of these projects are what? Are a portfolio of investment that we need to do in order to achieve this strategic objective. So what's the definition now of a portfolio? What's the definition now of a portfolio? Yes, it's a collection of projects and programs, because now I have similar projects, right? That I can group into programs as we agreed, right? We said you can group the similar projects into program in order to, help you manage them and coordinate them. So basically you can, okay. So now what's the portfolio? The portfolio is a collection of programs and projects that are managed or that are launched to achieve a strategic objective. Okay. So this is the investment that we do, that we put in programs and projects in order to achieve one strategic objective. Okay, does that make sense? So portfolio is, it's a portfolio, and inside the portfolio you have projects, you have also programs that have also projects within them. And you might also even have some operations there, because the portfolio can contain some operations. But the purpose of all of those projects and programs and operations is what? Is to achieve the one and same strategic objective, right? And that's why we call it a portfolio. Of course, PMI has a certificate for that. It's the Portfolio Management Professional, PFMP. Worldwide, there's only around 1,000 people who has this certificate. I am honored to be one of them. Okay, so this is a different, a different science on how to select the right projects and select the right programs for your portfolio. Okay, does that make sense? And basically this structure or this way of managing things is what we call, this is what we call the OPM, the Organizational Project Management. So basically the organizational project management is using project management along with program management and portfolio management in order to achieve strategic objectives, in order to advance the business capability. Okay, does that make sense? I hope it makes sense to you. Excellent. So basically, and once you understand that well, you know that program and project management focus on doing projects and programs the right way, right? So the project manager focuses on doing their project correctly, and the program manager focuses also on doing their programs correctly. But the portfolio management focuses on what? On doing the right projects and programs, on selecting the right projects and programs to include them in the portfolio, to invest in them in order to achieve the strategic objectives. Because imagine if the portfolio management selected projects and programs that were not relevant, that will not help us achieve our strategic objectives, the investment will be waste, correct or not? So the portfolio management focuses on selecting the right projects and programs, while the project and program management focus on doing their projects and their programs correctly. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully. Neom is considered a city. I think Neom is considered one initiative. to achieve some strategic goals in the vision, in the 2030 vision, okay? So basically, any strategic goal can be tackled using initiatives. The initiative then is translated into, most of the time, it's going to be translated into portfolio. Every initiative, every big initiative, of course, would be then translated into portfolio. So basically, NEOM, as an initiative, so NEOM is an initiative that is translated into portfolio. No, it's not a mega project, because it consists of different programs and different projects, my understanding at least. So it's not only one project. We are not working here in one project, which, for instance, you might think that we are only building a city. No, this is not the project. The project is not building a city. We are building a community. We are building a dream. We are bringing the best talents in the world, for instance, right? So we have different programs, different projects, probably even different portfolios, but under the same initiative, which is NEOM. NEOM, I would consider it an initiative. Okay. Okay, so this is the OPM. Portfolio is the highest level, yes, because again, the portfolio is the collection of projects and programs that we need to invest in order to achieve a strategic objective, okay? So again, the OPM advances organizational capability. This is how we advance the organization or the business capability using the OPM, by linking project, program, and portfolio management principles and practices with organizational enablers, with the structure, culture, technology, human resources, and so on, to support our strategic goals. Okay, this is the OPM. So this is what we were explaining. Okay, you have the strategy. Strategy comes from the senior leadership, right? From the top management. The top management, they draw the strategy. The strategy then is translated into portfolios. One portfolio or more. For each strategic objective, actually, we will have one portfolio. And the portfolio will be translated into programs and projects. The portfolio is a collection of programs and projects that we need to do, that we need to invest in order to achieve the strategic objectives. And the programs and projects will deliver some products, probably, that need to be operated and maintained, and that's why we need operation. Okay, so again, we need operation to operate and maintain the products of the programs and the projects, and programs and projects will the performance of them will be measured under the portfolio, and the performance of the portfolio as well will be measured, and results will be reported back to the senior leadership. And this is how we advance with the business, or advance with the organization, or even advance with the country, if you want to discuss initiatives like NEOM. Okay, no, definitely no. The project manager does not develop strategy. The project manager can have some input in developing the strategy, but it's not their responsibility, because they are focused, again, on delivering their projects correctly. If you're talking strategy, then it's the leadership and the portfolio management. Leadership and portfolio management, they are concerned of developing the strategy and selecting the right programs and portfolios to invest in. But the execution level is for program and project managers. Okay. Okay, and all of these again should be set to deliver outcomes, benefits, value. So we all the time measure and track the benefits and value of all of these projects, programs, and so on, to make sure that we are going in the right direction. Okay, does that make sense? I hope. So I know it's probably new information for you. I know probably you haven't heard of that before. This is very normal. And that's why, we're taking this course. We want to expand your information and your, perception of how things are done, of how management is done in big organizations. Okay. Okay. I think it's fair enough to stop here. What do you think? Again, we want to start slowly and then we take you a little bit more quickly. So let's stop here and hopefully give you the time to review and reflect on all of this new information and build this new, mentality of project management, of organizational project management. Now you know a lot of new things. Now you know about different development approaches that we can use in managing our projects and so on. So I think it's fair enough for you to go and reflect and review, and this will help you, inshallah, continue with more, hopefully with more enthusiasm in this course. Any question? Any question? No, managing a school is what? What happens in the school? Is it a project or is it operation? It's operation, right? What you do every day in the school, when you manage your school, you develop, for instance, the timetables, you follow up with the students, you follow up with the teachers and so on. This is operation. This is repetitive work that you do every day. It's not unique, it's not temporary in nature. Projects, again, are unique and are temporary in nature. But for instance, if you want to develop a system in order to manage the attendance in your school, developing a software to manage the attendance in your school, then this is a project, okay? Because the school is an organization, okay? And as an organization, you might also set strategic objectives for the school, for the organization. And you might also decide to do some investment in some projects like developing a software attendance software or school management system. You might also invest in developing your teacher skills. So you can have projects and programs, right? Again, and portfolio in your school. The expertise of senior leadership, strategy. The most important word here is strategy. They have the ability to develop out of the box strategies in order to achieve the vision and mission of the shareholders. Okay. Okay, any other question? Any other question? Excellent. So meet you next Thursday, inshallah. And again, I cannot emphasize enough on the importance of reviewing and reflecting on the first two lectures. We asked you to fill in a form, okay? In order to be able to access the recording, you need to fill the form with a Gmail, not a Hotmail, not a Yahoo mail, not in any other mail, only the Gmail is accepted. Okay, so we can add you to the private lists. And if you are not added to the private list, you won't be able to access the next lectures. Okay, so please make sure to fill in the form that we sent you in the WhatsApp group. Okay, thank you everyone, and looking forward to continue this with you on Thursday. Have a nice evening, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.